Attention, s'il vous plaît. That's better. Hello, and welcome to the Salon, where we are discussing all things period drama and in between. I am your Salonniere, Eugene. Welcome to the Quaint House. You find yourself in a strange place. A lover of all things period, film and television, thirsty for all the latest and greatest in historical media. But we are in a new era, the time of Emma and Bridgerton, Outlander and Downton, and still you find yourself longing for more. Something a little more obscure, vintage, or forgotten. Well, my friend, let me invite you now into the Salon. Today's first inaugural episode will be about a royal scandal. Produced in 1996 by the BBC and starring Richard E. Grant and Susan Lynch, this hour-long biographical dramatization explores the tantalizing, scandalous, and woeful marriage of George IV to Princess Caroline of Brunswick from 1795 to 1821. Cheeky, humorous, empathetic, and just a little bit depressing, this hour-long historical retelling boasts real quotes from the infamous couple as well as first-hand eyewitness accounts. With this production boasting real accounts of the historical quotes and actual actions, we are moved quite swiftly into the story. We meet Prince George, who is currently quite the spendthrift and must marry immediately. We then meet Princess Caroline of Brunswick, who is excited and a little hesitant to leave her country, but overall looking forward to meeting the prince. We pity Caroline. We loathe George. During this production, we learn the ins and outs of the couple's tumultuous relationship, including a current mistress, a disastrous first meeting, and a huge secret that sort of comes out on the prince's side. No shock there. After the disastrous meeting comes a disastrous wedding, and from there, a disastrous marriage is born. We will personally witness some of Caroline's accounts of her isolation from the court as well as her own husband, and the scandalous rumors that swirled around her world while the prince continued, eventually becoming the regent and future King George IV. We discover Caroline's relationship with the newspapers and the common people who find her a sympathetic person, especially in relation to the current Prince Regent. We witness that as Caroline pushes more and more for her independence, we see what great lengths George will eventually slip into to rid himself of his current wife. And so the digging of dirt on Caroline begins, leading to a quite invasive court proceeding in which her entire household is investigated. Okay, it is decided to rain during my salon meeting, so hopefully you won't hear it in the audio. Spoilers T means that I will be going into quite a bit of detail regarding this film, so if you're interested in watching it yourself, I would advise you to go ahead and pause or stop the video, watch it for yourself, and come back and get to hear it in the salon with me. Or if you're perfectly fine with spoilers, you can proceed as is. But if you would like to stop and watch it for yourself, you can find the timestamp of where to join me again, and I hope I'll see you back in the salon. So basically we meet Prince George. While those of us who are familiar with history know that he eventually becomes the Prince Regent, at this time he currently is not, because George III has all of his faculties at the time that we join him in the film. He is the definition of the Regency dandy, indulging in perfumes, women, all things aesthetic, gambling, cards, alcohol, you name it. And he now has to marry immediately to suit his creditors. Alternatively, we meet Princess Caroline, who is still currently in Brunswick, and we meet her just as she's received word of her betrothal to the prince from a Lord Malmesbury, who's gone to basically inspect the goods, for lack of a better term. She's been waiting to receive Lord Malmesbury, who serves in a way as a liaison for the couple. He immediately sets to warning Caroline that she will have to step up her fashion, her poise, and her hygiene in what will be a comedically uncomfortable scene. If you've seen it, you know the scene, you know, the oh yeah scene. So with Caroline warned and her fashion and hygiene now changed, we soon cut into England, where she has now made the journey and is meeting some of her court, including her new lady-in-waiting, who also happens to be the prince's current mistress, Lady Jersey. Immediately when we meet Lady Jersey, it is obviously uncomfortable. She is the prince's current mistress and now her chief and it's almost implied sole lady in waiting. Worse, Lady Jersey insists that she change her garb, implying that it will not please the prince. Caroline, being fully confident, decides to proceed with her dress, only deciding to maybe change a few things here and there. When next we see Caroline, she is dressed slightly differently, but has still kept some of her own style, much to the chagrin of the prince, who meets her and immediately demands a glass of brandy and removes himself from the room. Caroline is taken aback, understandably so. It is a horribly off-putting way to meet the person you're supposed to marry. She decides he is actively rude and does not look like his portraits. Oh. However, George does not find her attractive at all. In fact, he finds her rude and loud and boisterous. We get a little hint of just how comfortable Caroline decides to make herself. After a disastrous dinner where Caroline appeared possibly maybe too intoxicated and too open, we meet the prince and princess. Caroline looking wonderful and wonderfully dressed and ready to get married, and George soused to the gills. During the wedding nuptials, the Archbishop heavily emphasizes the phrase, forsaking all others, because as it turns out, the prince currently has a wife, a secret Catholic wife who he married some years prior, which also happens to be one of the most melodramatic scenes that we get. Basically, he has, in a way, sort of manipulated this woman to marry him after he received a very fatal injury from a sword, which is debatable as to whether it was from someone else's sword or his own, or whether he just reopened an old wound. Long story short, the prince currently has a wife, and apparently this is not necessarily a secret. However, she's currently estranged from him and living elsewhere at the time of the wedding. They proceed with the wedding and move on to what is another comical scene, the wedding night. George is still soused, still being George, still soused to the gills, and is, in other words, unable to fulfill that portion of the wedding night. However, making up for it as we see the next morning. We then proceed forward just a few months. Caroline is already in the midst of her pregnancy and has settled in at court. However, she has been horribly isolated and neglected by George. He is off gambling and drinking and spending and doing what he does. Meanwhile, Caroline goes through her pregnancy very much isolated with only George's mistress for company. This leads her to write many letters and say very harsh words, understandably, to the prince, while also trying to maintain her own dignity. The prince, being the prince, ignores all of these letters, basically telling her to disappear, and until their child is born, just kind of go away. Caroline, of course, understandably, does not necessarily accept this. She wants very few things. Number one, for Lady Jersey to be dismissed, and just for her to be allowed some sort of decency. The prince basically tells her, don't speak to me again. Caroline gives birth to a girl, and although this is a happy and momentous occasion, George, who is currently ill, instead of leaving things to his child's estate, writes to leave things to his estranged wife in what is the most melodramatic scene. I know I've said that many of the scenes are very melodramatic, but this one is the number one. Richard E. Grant is full camp melodrama. You'll see it when you see it. It's basically a false deathbed scene. After George once again refuses to dismiss Lady Jersey, Caroline decides to one-up him. She writes directly to the king, insisting that he remove Lady Jersey and just kind of allow her some sort of freedoms now that she's given them a child. The king, who apparently adores Caroline, agrees and goes ahead and allows for the dismissal of Lady Jersey and her removal from court. Caroline also is now allowed her own household, which she conveniently moves away from the prying eyes of court and away from George. By the way, while all of this is happening, some of this information is conveniently being slipped to the newspapers, who currently absolutely love Caroline and help to fuel the public's love of her. And so as she gains her independence, George, who of course is angered by the streak of independence, cuts off further communication with Caroline, which is fine because now we join her in her new household. Now, Caroline's household is one of dancing, diversion, and distraction away from court and away from George. During this time, George, wonderful George, decides to reconnect with his wife, bringing her to court and essentially playing house while Caroline is away. But we soon hear from some spectators and courtiers that rumors as to Caroline's household are swirling. Rumors about numerous lovers and scandalous parties, and even, forgive the term, bastard children. One child in particular, named William, is rumored to directly be her offspring. This rumor gets back to Prince George, which allows him to fervently lead the charge into a delicate investigation as to the child's maternity. They go through Caroline's household and eventually hear concerning accounts that the child is in fact Caroline's. That is until the child's actual mother comes forward. This quashes the delicate investigation, and George is foiled again, for the time being, of course. After the delicate investigation and over the years, Caroline's appearance completely changes. She's dressing wildly and darkening her eyebrows and her hair. I mean, she's going on a full hot girl summer. I'm sorry, I had to do it. We personally see her demeanor change, all of this while George is made regent in place of his father, who is currently dealing with mental illness. Soon the nobility begin to turn against Caroline, and she finds herself better suited to be out of the country rather than in. Caroline leaves to go abroad, right as George decides to bring in a new paramour, a new mistress. While we do hear of Caroline's travels and all of her scandalous behavior abroad, we don't quite get to see those accounts. We more lean towards images of the prince being absolutely bewildered, still looking for a way out of the marriage. Caroline travels for 6 years, eventually landing in Italy. Meanwhile, George is continuously receiving reports as to her scandalous behavior, including obscene necklines, see-through dresses, and even apparently founding her own religious order? During these displays, of course, there is one name that stands out. The name is Pergami. This is apparently a member of her household who Caroline has been rumored to have gotten very close with. Pergami is being routinely named as her current lover. Now, during this time, Princess Charlotte, who is George and Caroline's daughter, passes away in childbirth. George apparently is quite beside himself. However, there is not much time to mourn because soon George III passes, making our current Prince Regent the king. Caroline, understandably so, returns to England to assume her role as the queen. However, she is immediately bribed with lands abroad, of course, a new title, and of course lots of money. The only stipulation being that she should not be Queen of England. Basically, George wants to bribe her to essentially disappear. However, Caroline is not folding that quickly. She is the rightful Queen of England and will absolutely fight tooth and nail to defend that right. While she is threatened with divorce and a lengthy court battle, she argues still that she has a right to be the Queen of England. And while the people are happy for Caroline's current return to England, a bill of punishments is pushed into Parliament to ultimately force a divorce and force Caroline into a lengthy trial. So now we reach the trial of Caroline of Brunswick, a trial that was both lengthy and deeply intimate. Caroline stands accused of adulterous intercourse. Their words, not mine. She is ultimately forced to withstand 3 months of testimony from 85 members of her household. Maids, servants, porters, cooks, everyone is in this courtroom. We even get trusted servants disclosing her personal and intimate relationship with Pergami. During these scenes, we hear from some of the public and some of the nobility as to their support or surprise and shock regarding the trials and information that's hitting the newspapers. And despite George's best efforts, the public still seems to be slightly on Caroline's side, for now. Ultimately, the bill fails and Caroline can proceed as Queen of England. However, her reputation has been irreparably damaged. The king decides to proceed with his coronation despite the outcome of this trial. However, he completely disbars Caroline from attending. She is refused entrance, and it is heavily implied that the public has also now turned against her. Unfortunately, this is where the film starts to slow down, because we then cut to a few weeks after this attempt at entry into the coronation, and Caroline is very much on her deathbed. Her stomach is tumultuous. She is not keeping things down. She has essentially been given so much castor oil that it should have expelled all of her issues. However, today we believe that she may have had stomach cancer. Caroline decides that she is ready to pass. However, she has some stipulations. She settles her affairs, ultimately wanting to be buried in Brunswick, far away from England, and quite near King George IV's 59th birthday, Caroline passes. Her final wish being that her coffin be engraved with Caroline of Brunswick, the injured Queen of England. George, who is currently in Ireland at the time, receives the news, has a drink, but ultimately seems fine, and that's where we end. And so ends our spoilers tea. Now, this film, while historical and in a biographical style, is so humorously quirky. It feels like if Wes Anderson tried to produce a Regency-style biography. This film is multi-perspective, which is kind of a new feel. We hear from servants, we hear from the public, we hear from the prince and the princess, we hear from those who had accounts, and all of this allegedly being actual quotes from the real people of the time. Grant's performance is melodramatic, campy goodness. It does not get more dramatic than this. It's something that you don't see in a lot of period productions. He just went all out with it and went for it and went full into the foppish, dandy, annoying Regency F-boy feel of it. He does a fantastic job of playing such a loathsome, childish character. When I first viewed this, I wasn't a huge fan of Lynch's performance. However, as I watched it the other 2 to 3 times, I did feel she did a wonderful job getting us very sympathetic to Caroline's cause. She did a wonderful job giving us that feeling of isolation during her pregnancy, and during her times abroad and coming back stronger, I could definitely see and feel that change. Her performance, of course, by the end of the serial just has you feeling absolute pity and just kind of a genuine sad feeling for Caroline. You'll also notice that this film is kind of shot in a colder, darker color grade style. We have stark white rooms with high contrast spaces of shadowing, which I thought was very good in showing maybe just the difference in the moods between the characters. I thought the wonderful candlelight is always very homey to see, especially in Regency productions. And while these costumes seemed a little simpler for me, meaning that they didn't have quite an array as we saw in Bridgerton, Sanditon, Pride and Prejudice, other Regency productions, even Emma. While those costumes seemed simpler in that they had a smaller number, they were effective for each scene. Scenes of mourning where Caroline's hair is black and she's wearing, you know, her black accenture, to scenes even of the Prince Regent, his wedding costume being very elaborate and I believe period accurate. These costumes did a great job in conveying the scenes that were needed and just conveying what was needed for the production. Nothing less and nothing more. So why watch this if you haven't already? If you are looking for something heavy on the history in a biographical style for the anatomy of a scandal, there is nothing better than a royal scandal for you to view. It almost feels like you're sitting at a table with a professor discussing all the gossip and rumor of the disastrous marriage from an almost first-person perspective. Lovers of forgotten Regency history, lovers of camp, lovers of the genuine feeling of a historical BBC production, all of you will love this one. Or at the least, add it to your repertoire. All in all, you will find a royal scandal to be an interesting, comedic, and empathetic watch. And I believe... Sorry, they're serving a syllabub. I'm afraid that's all the time we have left in the salon, but I hope I'll see you next time. Once again, I am your Salonniere, Eugene. And, as always, I hope you'll stick around here in the Quaint House. Till then... I hope to see you next time. I am going to...